that parallels this is, of course, that the workforce is changing too. So it's not just the external parts of the organization that expect to see cultural change, it's the internal parts too. There's been a lot spoken in the last 2 years about, I'm going to say Gen Z, because obviously I'm from where I'm from. But younger folks today expecting much more from their employers, expecting much more in terms of support for their identity, for their work-life balance, for their career progression. And if you don't make the cultural changes that support those things, you also are going to find yourself in a situation in 10 years' time where your existing workforce is all retired and you can't hire the new people to replace them because they don't want to work there, because your culture is stuffy and old and slow and boring, and they see the writing on the wall.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. Today, I have a very special guest, Chris Dowell. Thank you so much for being here, Chris. Guys, Chris is an award-winning digital transformation executive known for his impactful work in pioneering global digital initiatives worth well over $100 million. We're lucky to have you here. He's been instrumental in lots of different changes in a lot of different legacy type of businesses and some startups. Very excited to pick your brain this morning, Chris.
Thanks, Avita. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's do it. Chris, take us a little bit through your journey up until this point. Where did you start? How did you get to where you're at today?
Let me see. I started with the realization that I wasn't a good enough mathematician to be a physicist. I studied physics at university, and the one realization that came through loud and clear was that the maths was going to be my undoing. So I became a software engineer for a while, and I found myself a little frustrated within that space, mostly because I would say I'm a mediocre software engineer at best.
What were you programming in?
Back in 2003, I was, and some people will hate this, I was writing PHP.
Okay.
PHP, MySQL.
I hated PHP.
Yeah. And I became a project manager for a bunch of small and then progressively larger and larger marketing agencies. And in 2010, I was poached from one of those to go and run a huge global program for Unilever. It was the rollout of their unified digital marketing platform outside North America. And it was it was an amazing experience and opportunity. Exposed me to a whole new level of kind of transformation. At the time, I didn't realize I was doing digital transformation. That's a term that was coined in 2011 by some guy from Capgemini in a report that they wrote. I realized afterwards that's what I've been doing since about 2007. And we'll probably talk more about my particular stance on what digital transformation is shortly. But from there, I ran larger and larger programs of work at a company called Publicis Sapient. So when I joined, there were about 10,000 people. They're now 25,000 people, acquired by Publicis. And I ended up running a huge program of work for Lloyds Banking Group, which is the largest retail banking group in the UK. I ran that for about 2.5 years. And in 2017, a guy that had worked for me a few years earlier had been begging me for 18 months to fly out to Santa Monica from London and join the startup that he and I had kind of come up with on my balcony in London. And then I'd gone, okay, yeah, well, I'm not moving to America. I'm very happy here, etc. He finally convinced me to fly out and join. I was walking on the beach in Santa Monica Saturday morning, just before flying back to London, and I thought, you know what, it's about time that I got a change, and I got some sunlight in my life. And so that's nearly 7 years ago now. I've been chief product officer at 3 different early stage startups in the intervening time, and now I'm kind of refocusing back into the digital transformation space because that's where I'm most passionate.
It's clear. Your LinkedIn headline, Chris, mentions the urgency of succeeding in digital transformation within the next 3 years. Why specifically the next 3 years? I know digital transformation is a huge thing, but it's been talked about so often in such a kind of, a passive way that we really don't know what that actually means, right? At a deep level. So tell us why you think, 1, it's important, 2, why it's so urgent that we get this done in the next 3 years.
Yeah, let me answer those questions in reverse order, just because the 3 years is fluff. It's a number I pulled out of the air. The reality is, I believe there is a huge amount of urgency, and a lot of organizations are far behind the curve of where they need to be in terms of going through this kind of digital transformation evolution within their culture and their organization. 3 years is just a number. Frankly, between COVID, difficult economic signals in the last few years, a lot of companies have been putting this off. And we see already today there is a huge shift in consumer expectations, not just amongst younger consumers, also consumers as they're aging out, they're still upgrading their expectations both in terms of level of service, quality of service, channels through which they can access service, etc. The 3 years is made up. The 10 years, the other half of that line, if you don't succeed in transformation in the next 3 years, you won't exist in 10. I believe in that. I believe that a decade from now, companies that aren't already well on the path to change are going to have fallen by the wayside. They're going to be outcompeted by their existing competitors who are on that path, or new, young, emerging organizations will have come up and eaten their breakfast for them. And I guess that takes us to the question of what really is digital transformation. And it's not a phrase that I love, honestly. There is so much freight that comes with that makes people think that it is all about technology change. And the reality is that every organization of any scale is a technology company today anyway.
Yeah.
Every organization has a CTO, a CIO, a bunch of internal software engineers, or at the very least a third party that they use to build all their internal tools, their services, their interfaces, etc. It's not about technology. It's not another technology program. There is certainly a measure of technology that is used as the method, the carriage, if you like, through which to achieve digital transformation. But the transformation in question is cultural. It's not about, we need to implement, this year, last year, we need to implement AI. We need to implement large language model, chatbots, whatever it might be. It's not about a few years ago, we need everything to be on the blockchain. These things are, sure, that's what everyone's talking about right now. It's not about the technology change. It's about moving from an organization where we decide whether we're going to do technology programs 3 or 4 years in advance. We spend 18 months specifying them. We spend 6 months finding a systems integrator who can do the work with us. We have specs written up in business requirement documents or whatever form they are that are signed off in advance. We spend another 18 to 24 months building it, testing it, and when we release it, it's already 5 years behind where it needs to be. The platform that we were aiming for no longer exists or has been migrated away from massively.
Sure.
None of our customers or our suppliers, partners, whomever it might be, is ready to use it. And it's not because we didn't do the right thing from where we were 5 years ago. It's that we approached it in a way that is just ultimately unfit for purpose. So the cultural change, just to unpack that a little further, the cultural change isn't saying, okay, we need to implement agile development methodologies. Sure, we do, but that's not the cultural change that needs to happen. The cultural change is we need to empower people, we need to flatten organizations, and we need to let the people on the front lines be much more instrumental in defining what our approach to, again, those partners, suppliers, customers, consumers, whatever it might be, in defining what that approach is, and then we need to shorten the cycle time. There are so many large organizations that have agile development methodologies, and they're still based on a 16-month program of defining what the work's going to be.
It's not very agile. Chris, when you say people in the grounds, you're talking about more of a bottoms-up approach versus top-down, right? Because instead of some executive coming up with this idea that they heard in a meeting, we must have a digital transformation, let's go, spend $1 billion on a bunch of technologies and systems, and just for it to become moot or irrelevant in 2-3 years by the time it's resolved. You're talking about in the trenches, folks that are talking to the customers on a daily basis. Is that what you mean by frontline?
That is what I mean. Whether that's customers, again, I try and make the point this doesn't have to be customer facing. This could be partner facing, supplier facing, whomever. The problem exists throughout the organizational culture. I'm also not saying that we need to allow every person on the front line to just say, we should have one of these and it gets spat out. There needs to be governance in place. There needs to be some degree of centralized decision making, at the very least, to ensure that we don't build the same thing 17 times. It's not a kind of utopian picture that I'm trying to paint where everyone on the front lines gets to just define what tools they think will help the customer they're currently on the phone with the most. What I am advocating for very much is that is where the knowledge of what is needed lies. That is where the problems that are faced by all those external parties on a constant basis is encountered, discussed, understood, hopefully, and where ideas can come from. And there's a really good example of this, which is, or a counterexample, I should say. During the 2010s, there were a lot of large organizations that built up innovation labs. And those innovation labs sat in an ivory tower in the middle of the organization. And maybe they'd go out and talk to a subject matter expert, someone from the field or someone who worked in a bank branch, for example. But ultimately, they would just sit there and they would come up with what they thought were the innovations that were needed. And some of those innovation labs created great work. I've done a lot of work with those innovation labs. But ultimately, a lot of what they created was not needed. There was no demand for it. There was no real use case for it. And what they created was a nice, shiny tech demo, but ultimately a waste of time.
Nice. No, that makes sense. Working at these large organizations, tell me some of the challenges you've I guess come across in implementing these cultural strategies in these organizations.
Yeah. So the two biggest challenges I would say are, first of all, any large organization, the senior echelons of that organization are made up of a number of people who've got there through exercising good judgment multiple times over many years. And what I'm suggesting is that we're now at a state where it's not that their judgment isn't good, it's that they're too far removed and they take too long, and their judgment is no longer timely enough. And that's understandable. They have a lot on their plates and they're responsible for looking over a huge estate of whatever part of the business it is, and managing all of that and keeping it all in play and making sure that from a financial perspective it's working, from a people perspective it's working, etc. It's not a slight against those people in any way. However, getting these other people in the organization much more involved at the lower levels is important to ensure we can overcome that. So the first is just generally trying to have that conversation without insulting or otherwise having those people feel slighted. It's not that they're doing something wrong. It's not that their judgment is poor. They just have too much on their plates and they're too far from the coal face, if you like, to be able to make the judgments as quickly as they need to in as many different places as they need to be made. And that's where flattening structures can start to help a lot, because you get to delegate that authority to people who are still trusted, but are able to make decisions in a kind of locally autonomous way. The second part, same people, it's not about education, it's about ego may not be quite the right word, but that's self-image. I am senior, I am important, I've worked hard for this, what I say should be what goes. And that happens a lot. It's people pushing back because they don't like the implications for themselves. They're going to seem less powerful because their word will mean less, or they will have the final say over fewer things. They are worried that they will have less control. Control is not necessarily a good thing, but once you have it, it's hard to let go of it. They'll have less control over financial outcomes or people decisions, or even kind of the small tactical scale implementation of strategy. Those people tend to get kind of, a little defensive, and getting through that can be really tricky.
There's also got to be a fear that if the strategy doesn't go in the right direction, it could technically even cost them their job, right?
Yes. Cost them their job, equally cost them their retirement, their next role. If one of the outcomes of this digital transformation that we're going through is that my part of the organization is no longer needed. I'll draw a very, very broad strokes and made up example. It's not intended to call back to reality in any particular way, but let's say there's a call center, and that call center is responsible for fielding customer service requests. And there's a lot of complaints, and there's a lot of people being diverted from other possibly self-service channels because those channels aren't great. So I've got a call center with 3,000 agents in it. Now we fix all those other things, and suddenly my call center only needs 300 people. Well, when I'm looking for my next job, how big was the call center you were last running? Oh, it's 300 people. How big is the compensation package you're looking for? Well, it's only 300 people. I can only draw myself. Now, that's clearly a very simplistic example. But if I get into, okay, what does my retirement look like? What does my next role look like? What does my next compensation package look like? It's not just that you're threatening my current self-image, it's that you're threatening my thoughts of where my future was going to go. And so people in those situations can get defensive, that they're worried for themselves, and that's totally understandable and acceptable. And so one of the hardest parts of the cultural change that I talk about a lot in digital transformation is helping people understand that this isn't about disempowering people. It's not about making people look bad. It's about how can we achieve the best outcome.
And if you're an empire builder, this is also intimidating, right? If you're an empire builder, it's just, wow, all of a sudden my empire is dwindling. I went from 300 people to implementing an AI project that went well, and now I don't need these people. And now I'm really responsible for 20, and eventually I'm not going to be needed at all. There's got to be an insecurity that comes with that, especially for those type of folks.
It can do. And I don't want to paint digital transformation as just one thing. It can go in the other direction as well. It could result in a huge expansion of the business.
Of course.
You could suddenly have that empire just because there's now 5 times as much turnover. There's a lot of things that can come out of going through this transformation.
Chris, what are the most typical businesses that need digital transformations and are maybe doing it wrong?
If we talk about doing it wrong, that's kind of a case-by-case basis. In terms of businesses that need to go through transformation, I think any business that was started in the last 15 or 20 years probably doesn't have a lot of the baggage that makes it particularly difficult to have these cultural changes. If we look at Alphabet or Meta, for example, as huge behemoth examples, they had a very agile way of doing all of their work, not just software development, all of their work right from the get-go.
Yeah.
Now they've grown and they've had a lot of kind of extra kind of fluff and insulation around those processes as they've grown, but their core of how they deliver their products and services is still like that. A great example of that growth would be Spotify. There's a lot of talk in the beginning about Spotify's squads and how they were fully autonomous and had so much control over what they were doing. And a lot of people in the agile software development community were really holding them up as being a fantastic example. And as Spotify grew, those squads grew apart. And measures had to be put in place to ensure that they weren't off building things that were cross purposes or building the same thing twice. The organizations that do need it, though, are the organizations that have been around for 30, 40, 50 years. The Lloyds Banking Group that I mentioned earlier is about 350 years old. It's been going for a very long time. It's not their 350 years of history that's the problem. It's their 50 years. It's a great example. I was working on some of their pensions offering at one point, and there is still bear in mind this is 10 years ago now, so this may no longer be true, but at the time I was working on it, there was a physical mainframe, a reel-to-reel, honest-to-goodness, old-school mainframe in a basement somewhere that was making final pension underwriting decisions. That's just an example, and it's not a particularly extreme one, of the way that organizations that have had technology embedded in their fabric for 50 years have a huge legacy. Banks, healthcare providers, big insurance companies, automotive companies, energy companies. These are all areas where they started implementing technology back when that was exciting and new. And it's 1970, 1965. We've got a computer the size of a room that helps us do some particularly difficult calculation. And they've built on that and built on that and built on that for a very long time, and they haven't necessarily got rid of the old stuff that sits underneath them. Okay. And the old technology isn't the problem. What the old technology means about the culture is the problem. That old technology means that we support that technology in an old way. We have to, because it was built in that way. We have software development methodologies that are 30 years old that we still follow because we know they work for maintaining these huge outdated systems. So when you go through digital transformation, and I said at the beginning it's not about technology, there are a whole load of technology things you will do. Like becoming cloud native is something you'll do. Becoming data oriented is something you'll do. Fully overhauling your information security infrastructure is something you will do. All of these things will be part of digital transformation to some extent or another. To my mind, and this is where I think a lot of them go wrong to the other part of your question a moment ago, is that they focus on those things. They think that that's what the transformation is. And that is just a side effect of the transformation. The transformation is, how do we change the culture? We want to be more flexible and responsive. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do it by not owning our own metal. We're going to do it by running everything in the cloud. How are we going to do that? We're going to do it by not spending 6 months of the year with everything on lockdown because we've had another information security breach. How are we going to do that? We're going to do that by using the latest tooling, whether that's AI or anything else, to speed our time to market, to change the way we deploy our headcount, et cetera, et cetera. Those things come as a result of the cultural change, but if you make them the point of the transformation, that's just another technology program, and where you end up at the end of it is a bunch of people that didn't ask for the change being annoyed by the fact that they've had to change.
Wow. Chris, if I'm a CEO of a Fortune 500 bank and I've been doing this for 30, 40, 50 years, with all due respect, we've got a great business. We've been doing this for a long time. We're top 5 bank, in the United States. Why do we care about this culture? We are doing a digital transformation. It's clearly happening. And yes, some of the initiatives go to waste. Some of the initiatives have been massive. Why should I care about the cultural implications that you just talked about? Who cares? At the end of the day, we're getting the job done. And we got the job done because we had the culture. Convince me that I need to do something different or change my culture.
Yeah, so I guess, again, two parts to that. One is just echoing the thing we talked about right at the beginning of this, which is your culture has got you to here, but what got you here won't get you to there, won't get you to the future. Everything around you is changing, and it's changing at an ever faster pace. You don't need to change at that pace. You need to change so that you can keep changing as that pace keeps changing.
Great.
If you just make the change, we can move as fast as the outside world wants us to. Okay, that's as fast as we can move. Can we move as fast as we need to move next February? Oh no, we can move a bit slower than that because we're already moving as fast as we can. If we don't change the underpinnings of this, we can't keep up with where we need to be again in 10 years' time.
Chris, in your experience, how critical is the founders or the C-suite's engagement in these digital transformation initiatives, and how do you ensure their ongoing support and involvement?
It's a great question. It's utterly critical, and that is one of the hardest parts of transformation. I mentioned earlier people with vested interests, people who don't want their empires, to your point, being disrupted. Your C-suite people are those people. They're the epitome of that class of person. Getting them bought in is extremely difficult. It is not impossible, and if you have good switched-on C-suite people who can see the future or who can acknowledge that there are those around them who are good at prognosticating, they will buy in. They'll see the necessity of it. However, CEOs that are expecting to check out in 2 years' time, they want to maintain their legacy, and their legacy is what's happening when they leave, rather than what happens 5 years after that. CEOs that plan to be there for the next 17 years, they're going to be more invested, and that is the nature of, I think, kind of the personal motivations that people in those situations find. I don't wish to malign anyone individually. There are certainly people who want to leave in 2 years who can still be looking far into the future and be trying to organize the organization in such a way that it's prepared for that. But there are definitely challenges in getting these people on board. That said, if you do get them on board, they often become huge advocates. The problem that parallels this is, of course, that the workforce is changing too. So it's not just the external parts of the organization that expect to see cultural change. It's the internal parts too. There's been a lot spoken in the last 2 years about, I'm going to say Gen Z, because obviously I'm from where I'm from. Yeah. But younger folks today expecting much more from their employers, expecting much more in terms of support for their identity, for their work-life balance, for their career progression. And if you don't make the cultural changes that support those things, you also are going to find yourself in a situation in 10 years' time where your existing workforce is all retired and you can't hire the new people to replace them because they don't want to work there because your culture is stuffy and old and slow and boring and they see the writing on the wall.
And now you got to do a cultural transformation, good Lord, or HR transformation.
Right, which to my mind is all part of the same thing. We spoke a little before about another example, which was that when I was doing this work with Lloyds Banking Group, we didn't just change a bunch of tech, of course we did, but we also redesigned bank branches, okay? And we changed the bank's compensation strategy. We changed what it meant for their employees to be successful. Mm. And that, to me, is a great example of what digital transformation should be doing. It should be saying, how can we change the organizational culture from the ground up so that it supports what we need the organization to do in the future, internally, externally, etc.
Chris, you talked about how critical it is for the C-suite to not only buy in, but to remain engaged. I'm thinking about a story where we were building an engineering team of a really great tech company, startup pre-IPO type of company, really good and actually a pioneer in their industry. This is not a legacy business. The problem is the founder was an old mindset, brilliant guy, but he's an old mindset. And they would talk about mobile first strategy as like the future, but it was the present. And they kept talking about it. And I was thinking, wow, they must be talking about something bigger than what I'm thinking, which is you have to start engaging with the mobile, right? You have to have native mobile apps, and that has to be mobile first. They didn't pull it off. It took them so long to be mobile first that it was already, I think they'd hindered their growth. And just to show you the difference, they went from a $700 to $1 billion potential exit down to being sold for scraps to a European company. And it was kind of a sad story because these guys had hired some of the best engineering talent you can think of. They were the pioneer, they were the leader, but within a few years, they got passed on because the culture didn't shift per your statements to constantly keep up and be ahead of the curve versus just being forced to go to the next cool new technology, which is, let's say in that case, 10, 15 years ago, mobile first, Right. So I agree with you. Yeah, I think he was an anchor, to be honest with you, as brilliant as he was, I think he was the anchor in that business and got in his own way.
Yeah, I think there are two parts within that. One is the fact that large, especially legacy organizations, they're never going to be on the front end of the adoption curve. They might be fast followers if they're lucky. They'll never be early adopters. They'll never be pioneers. Maybe they'll have some innovations in very specific spaces, but on the whole, the most they can do is hope to be fast followers. There's just too much risk associated with moving that much infrastructure and that much organizational inertia too fast.
And that's I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No, and that's an appropriate kind of risk assessment on their part, right? So that's okay. Equally saying, we need to be mobile first, and that's going to be our future. And let's say this is 2012 or something, thinking that mobile first is the future instead of something that is urgent, pressing, and we need to have been doing this for a year or two already.
Sure.
The iPhone has been out for 5 years at this point.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a big part of it. The other part of that is that you do often find, especially in first generation companies with the founders still at the head, their innovation, their big thing that made them successful, even more so if it's not a tech company, if its products and services are not technology inherently. The way in which those people were innovative or motivated, forceful, well-connected, whatever it might be that got that business off the ground and made it successful in the first place, has very little to do with these changes that I'm talking about. Let's say you're in chemical engineering and you've pioneered some new process for synthesizing something. Fantastic. Your expertise sits in chemical engineering and probably in business. It doesn't necessarily sit in technology and understanding the rapidly changing ways in which companies need to serve their customers and their partners and their suppliers and so forth. And yet you, as this chemical engineering company, are sitting there with multiple suppliers bringing you equipment, bringing you chemicals, multiple customers that you're selling to, maybe multiple channels through which you sell. And all of the individual people in all of those chains are just people. They're just people that live in the world that are excited to hear about this ChatGPT thing, or are really, really annoyed that they have to get on TikTok in order to keep up with their son's latest whatever he's up to. Whatever it might be, they live in that same world that is moving on. They are now used to banking online. They're now used to being able to do their grocery shopping online. They're now used to being able to pull up their phone and check when that package is being delivered by UPS. if you don't mirror what's happening in the rest of their lives with the ways you expect them to engage with you as this big chemical engineering company, they're going to go with someone that makes their life easier.
Correct. Chris, I feel like this is another reason that large companies stop innovating and they just acquire for growth, right? They don't grow through innovation and through new products. It's usually they just acquire smaller companies and pay probably 5 times more just to get that innovation culture or an innovative new product. Do you agree?
I do, and I've been acquired twice in my consulting life, and I've seen that culture that has been acquired be gradually subsumed by the parent company's culture. The problem is always a David and Goliath one. The company that is being acquired, no matter how innovative it is, no matter how amazing its culture is, it is joining a company that is much larger, and it is dancing to that much larger company's tune. All of that company's financial controls are going to get imposed. All of that company's HR controls are going to get imposed. Those things are all great, don't get me wrong, but they start to chip away at whatever it was that allowed the logistical part of this organization to support that culture. And suddenly the software engineers inside that innovative team are engaging with their peers in the old world. And the interface between those two cultures starts to smear. And sure, we may get some innovation and some agility and some responsiveness that makes its way into the parent organization. But it's like mixing two fluids. You've got a very small volume over here and a big volume over here. Once they mix, you're kind of diluting whatever was in that small company that was acquired.
And I've seen the energy drain out of some of these innovative startup companies. We've had clients that the small company gets acquired, like you said, and the CIO wants to hire but can't because HR won't let them. It's laughable, right? And it's almost to us is like we don't even want to work with these guys because the CIO does not have the power to build his own team is insane to me. You would almost think, Chris, if we're going to hire an innovative company that got to where they're at in 7 years and I paid hundreds of millions of dollars for this company or whatever I paid, I want to steal some of that culture, some of that energy, some of that edge, that fast-paced, truly agile mindset. But you're absolutely right. I think what ends up happening is 8 out of 10 times I would guesstimate these companies kind of become just sucked dry of that and they just become another business line within this huge organization.
And some of that goes back to misalignment of incentives again. And this isn't necessarily anything to do with digital transformation. This exists everywhere. If your HR department is measured by, how few problems do we have? Well, then we know what works. We know how to minimize those problems. We're going to fit this new organization into our existing structure because it has the training that allows us to avoid getting anything difficult happening. We have the procedures for something difficult does occur. How do we respond to it? It's just we're incentivized to minimize the friction and the disruption that comes out of our human resources. If we have human resources who are not aligned with and kind of buffered by and surrounded by all the organizational padding that we've put around the rest of the organization, they are a risk to us. They're a risk to whatever it is that is used to incentivize us. Again, whether that's my compensation, whether that's my promotion, career path, etc. So it's in my best interests within HR to try and smooth that out. And the best way to smooth it out is to make it homogenous.
Yeah. Chris, you've led projects that have won dozens of international awards. What makes a digital project award-winning in your eyes?
This is an interesting question. A lot of the awards that the teams that I've led have won have been for what I have come to consider a little bit kind of sparkle rather than true utility. So it's an interesting question. Of the projects that I've run, the programs that I've run, the ones I'm most proud of probably aren't the ones that won the awards. The awards that I've won, my teams have won 3 Cannes Lions, for example. One for making a vending machine that gave you a free ice cream if you smiled at it, and a couple of others that aren't quite as amusing. There was a Wikipedia, but for sneakers, so on and so forth. Those projects were great, but they were sparkle, as I say. They were made in order to look great and to be a talking point, something really, really cool that people could talk about. But a vending machine that gives you free ice cream if you smile at it, that's not something that we want to then build 25,000 units of and put in every airport and shopping mall in America. That's something that we're going to build 11 of and ship them around the world to events because it's a gimmick. It's a really cool gimmick. We did amazing work. The technology team did a fantastic job. But ultimately, it wasn't something that we're building to make a fundamental change to our business. The projects that I think have made the most impact are the ones which are a bunch of people in a back room that never get any credit. They're the ones who say, oh yeah, we've moved our ability to service customers digitally from 36% to 52%. Right, that's huge. That means that customers who don't like picking up the phone, don't like interacting with humans, can do stuff on their mobile, on their computer, whatever it might be, in almost 100% more cases. That's enormous. Those projects are the projects that I think are the most impactful and have the greatest outcomes. Nice. What makes any project successful, though, ultimately, it's just about alignment. It's about everyone pulling in the same direction. And that is partially leadership, it's partially culture. I don't think that's new or unique, or I don't think I've got anything to say that hasn't been said a million times on that front. We know how to get projects done. That's never been the problem. The reason I think digital transformation needs to be something different is that it's not about getting the project done. It's about changing us as a company, an organization, an enterprise, so that we can get more and more of these projects done in better and better ways, faster and faster timescales into the future.
So if you were going into a company that was interested in a digital transformation, sure, we'll get there. Sure, we'll do all the initiatives that you think are important and others that come up. But let's focus on your culture. Let's change the culture, make it more innovative, more agile, so that we can consistently disrupt, we can consistently upgrade our technology and do this digital transformation concept. Is that about right? Does that summarize it, Chris?
It does, and the way which you go about doing that is typically a bunch of Trojan horses. You start with some technology programs. After everything I've been saying about it's not about technology programs. You start with some technology programs. You start with some technology programs that get to sit alone. They don't have to interface with the rest of the organization too much. You start by saying, this is the target operating model. This is where we're moving towards. Now we're going to start moving existing pieces closer and closer to it. We're going to set up some shared services. We might have a shared DevSecOps center of excellence, for example. And as we shift everything, we're going to say, right, we're going to give you local DevSecOps inside your organizational line of business, but we're also going to have a central governance group that makes sure you're all following the same patterns, you're all using the same tools. If you have a new need, we consider that centrally so that we can say, oh yeah, that seems like a good. You've got a big need for very, very quick deployment of containerized platform components. Okay, cool. Well, let's say for some reason we weren't already using Kubernetes. Okay, we'll look at that. Yeah, Kubernetes is a great example. Off you go. You can use Kubernetes. That kind of Trojan horse, as I say, you do that again and again, and you start bringing the rest of the organization closer and closer to those pieces. And obviously this varies in every single example. Every culture is different to begin with, so there's not a standard starting point. Every organization's existing tech stack, technology estate is different. But fundamentally, you start by changing things that you can consider in isolation. You consider those target operating models, and then you start shifting the rest of the organization towards those. And it'll take 3 years. Unless you're a $100 billion company, in which case it'll take 7.
Wow.
These aren't easy things to achieve. This is a wholesale cultural change. Everyone in the organization is going to think about what they do differently at the end of this. And you can't just tell people to do that.
It takes years. It takes years. It takes years to accomplish things that are going to scale and that are going to stick. So I agree. Chris, what's next for you? You worked at these large companies. You worked at some startups. What's next? I think you're ready for your next adventure, if I'm correct. Where do people find you? What type of projects or new executive roles would you like to see yourself in, and where you can add the most value?
So my next adventure in 2 weeks' time is I'm doing some more Class 6 whitewater rafting. It's been a great year of whitewater rafting and kayaking for me. In answer to your question more seriously, though, Looking for an executive role leading digital transformation somewhere, whether that's an organization that hasn't started yet and really needs kind of that kick to get moving, or it's an organization who just needs to keep going down that path and needs someone to lead it. I have very broad industry experience. I've worked in financial services, I've worked in energy, automotive, CPG, retail, blah, blah, blah. In reality, I don't think that industry experience matters in digital transformation. One of the big things you're trying to do is upend the status quo. Now, we've talked about upending the status quo inside the organization, but if people walking in with an expectation that this is how the industry works, their learning curve is shorter, but they have those expectations already. They don't ask necessarily the questions about why does it work this way, what can we change. So I don't personally believe that is hugely important. Certainly for me, having come from a consulting background, I've got up to speed on new industries multiple times. So what's important to me in an organization that I might join to lead a transformation is the existing culture. I don't particularly kind of want to end up in an organization that is too hidebound and too stuck in its ways. That said, those are the ones that need digital transformation most. So who knows? We'll see what happens.
That was my thought, right? The messier, the better, because this is crunchy, or the most likely to be able to actually accomplish what you think is possible if things are done well.
So I'd love to go to work every day and everything be smooth sailing, and I just get to sit there and go, oh yeah, let's do one of these, and everyone goes, yeah, let's do it. That's not real. As you say, the messier the better. I don't know. I think there's probably a bunch of elements of what makes something messy that need to be considered. If it's messy because it's currently not in great shape, but the C-suite is fully locked in and on board with the idea that this needs to change, absolutely, that's great. I love dealing with stuff like that. My last team in London before I left was 260 people, 12 different product work streams, 10 teams working across them, and synthesizing that and keeping it all straight. I love that sort of thing. Flip side, an organization that's doing pretty well, but its boardroom is in the middle of a civil war, not totally awesome. And the reason that's not totally awesome is that you've got to solve that problem first. And that problem that's not the problem I've been talking about. Sure. That's a separate problem. Sure, I could be instrumental in doing that, but that's not anything to do with digital transformation. That's Amazing. Just corporate politics.
Chris, you've been great, man. I'm sure people can find you on LinkedIn, Chris Dowell. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your great insights. Let's stay connected and let's keep changing the world, man.
Awesome.
Enjoy your next trip. See
Thanks,
you, Chris.
Have a great day.
You too. And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avita Santoblian, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.